If I can get this gizmo to work for me. All right, just a quick news bite. I don't want to get too far off on it because the overseers have told me not to go too crazy on the news related events or project and conject things that may or may not be happening. But I find some of this is relevant. I don't know how I cannot mention some of it, given that the world today is if it's ever has been, it's forming into the alliance seen in prophecy. So in case we think that maybe sometimes I'm out on the edge, making up things, some wild conjecture. I've mentioned that I believe the Red Horse is World War III, the first judgment of the apocalypse. And apocalypse, by the way, is the name of the book of Revelation. In the old world, the first sentence of a book, of course in Greek, gave the title to the book, the writing. And the name of the book of Revelation is Apocalypsis in Greek, and we say in English, apocalypse. So when the media talks about apocalypse, of course, they don't really know what they're talking about because they're talking about what they think apocalypse means. But there's the real apocalypse where the term came from, and that is the book of Revelation, which we're going to study and are studying. So, but it's interesting that this is study finds. I think this is a site devoted to a lot of different studies that they do where they gather information. So I think it used to be called a mega trend in the old days. There's certain topics that are becoming more and more prevalent. And right now, the biggest topic is apocalypse. And so, the end of the world is becoming a normal conversation. I don't think that was true 10 years ago. I don't think it was true 5 years ago, pre-COVID. I don't think people would have accepted this conclusion. But now things have drastically changed. Besides killer diseases in the world, we have at least 3 hotspots that didn't exist 5 years ago. We have Chinese wanting to take Taiwan, and we're not even close to ready to defend them. And I mean the U.S. And we have Russia against Ukraine, which is really Russia against us in Europe. And then we have the Middle East. So we got 3 very big hot spots that were not on fire 5 years ago. So is it always the way it's always been and it's not changed? It's always been this way? No, that's whoever tells you that. They must have their head in the sand. What's that bird that sticks their head in the sand? Ostrich. Yeah, you're right. They have an ostrich mentality. World on brink of hybrid World War III, which will lead to radioactive Europe. Of course, this is talking about one of the 3 hotspots I'm talking about. In other words, Europe is becoming more and more aware that Russia may have designs to take over like Estonia and certain other countries. And that's why Sweden and some of them want to join NATO. I'm not saying this is directly Bible prophecy, but it shows that the world is becoming more and more unstable. Okay, and things are starting to realign. In fact, some sites have said this is the big post-World War II realignment. In other words, after World War II, NATO was formed, and the world has been very stable the way it has been for like 70 years, over 70 years. And but now things are radically changing. Even Israel has been relatively stable. They've had 4 big wars in the past, but they haven't had a big war since 73 until now, potentially now. I'm not going to call what's going on a big war, but it certainly is very unstable over there, and it could turn on a dime. We could wake up tomorrow and find that Israel and Iran are at a serious war. That could easily happen. No predictions. I'm just saying that's why you got to keep your ear to the ground prophetically. So what we see is that the world is not the crazy old Bible prophecy teacher, but the world is aligning with what I'm teaching. Okay. Oh my goodness, who made that? That's horrible. Okay, sorry. Okay, I don't want you to freak out. I'm just trying to give you an idea, and don't get upset about it. Basically, because I really don't like a lot of charts. But in the teaching of Revelation, I wanted us to understand a very fundamental principle that keeps people from understanding it. That is that on the bottom below the red line, by the way, the red line is all the chapters 1 through 22, just to give us a timeline left to right. Below is the serial occurrences on Earth. In other words, the historical churches were real churches on Earth. That was a real series of churches. And then the seals began, the first judgment of the tribulation. And they are in time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seals. And then we have the trumpets, and they are in time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trumpets, although the 7th trumpet is moved over an extra chapter. And then finally, after we have a lot of what I call parenthetic or parenthetical chapters, we see that the bowls occur, and the bowls are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then after all those 3 judgments, series of judgments, which are all in time, then we have events in time, which are the parousia, which is the second coming, physical, visible. Everybody in the world will see him coming. Then, of course, the millennium starts up his kingdom. And then eventually, after the millennium, we're going to get to I call them the 3 news: new heaven, new earth, new Jerusalem. Everything is new, new, new. So, and then we have eternity. It's, when that starts, then we really start eternity. Eternity, I have it in the serial, but at that point, of course, it is beyond serial time. It's not in time anymore. We're in the infinite dimension. The parenthetic above the red line, these are chapters which I like to call something. God is using his chronoscope. I made that up. Chronos means time. My son used to work for Chronos software company, timekeeping. But anyway, so Chronos and scope means to see. So we have telescope to see across, microscope to see small, and then God has something we don't have, which is a chronoscope, which means God can at any point in time focus in and look at that point in time and describe it. He can just zero in and talk about it. And that's what these are. In other words, and there's a lot of them, about half of them almost. So we see that chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 are all parenthetical. In other words, they are, it's not a matter that they're not in time, but God is focusing in on particular aspects of the tribulation time. And so when you read them, the people get mixed up because they think this all should be, like a book we would write. If I wrote it, it would all be, Western mind, logical, ABC, the whole thing would flow. But in God's time, he has a different look at it. And he's given us information, and only the Holy Spirit can interpret it. Our main thrust and the focus of the book overall is point A, B, and C. Point A is the beginning, which starts at chapter 6, the seals. And then point B is when the middle point, when Antichrist declares himself God and imposes 666. And then point C is the end, Armageddon, and when Christ returns to earth. Keep in mind the rapture, he's not coming to earth. People get confused about that. I've taught about that in length. There's at least 3 different passages that clearly define what that is. But oftentimes it's called a secret coming, a hidden coming. When he comes for the church, the world will not see it. They'll see the results of it. In other words, like some of these movies show you, but they're not going to see him. Nobody in the world is going to see him come for the church. Okay. And by the way, the church is not mentioned all the way from point A through point C. Chapter 6 all the way to 18, there's no mention of the church anywhere because the church is not here, for those people who don't understand that concept. Chapter 3 and 4 discuss, actually 2 and 3. Chapter 2 and 3 discuss the church. And in the first 3 chapters, the word church, ecclesia, is mentioned 7 times. From 6 to 19, all the way through what is known as the tribulation in the timeline. The church doesn't exist. You can't find the word anymore because the church is not on earth. There are believers, but don't confuse believers. In the Old Testament, there was believers, but they're Old Testament believers. They're not like us. New Testament believers, we have the Spirit in us. Nobody in the Old Testament had the Spirit in them. Nobody was born again. That's why Christ had to instruct Nicodemus, remember? He said, what am I going to do? Climb inside my mother's womb and come out again? Oy vey. No, and Jesus said, you're a leader of Israel and you don't know this. So, and he was representing the Old Testament knowledge and wisdom. Nicodemus had no knowledge of being born again because nobody in the Old Testament was ever born again. That's why we are what we are. The Old Testament people are the wife of Israel's the wife of God, but the New Testament people are the bride of Christ, two different entities. Okay, don't confuse them. They are not the same people. The Old Testament people are not the bride of Christ. And the bride of Christ, we are not the Old Testament people. There's a clear divide. Just pick up your Bible, open it up, go to the middle. Mine has a lot of stuff in between. Go past Malachi and before Matthew, and you're going to see that it divides in two parts. There's a reason why it says Old Testament and New Testament. Old will and new will. Okay, when the new will comes into effect, the old one is done away with. Doesn't mean it's not true or anything. It just means that the emphasis is no longer there. We don't slaughter bulls and we don't, sacrifice things in a temple or any of that. So all that Levitical law is gone. But the whole idea here is that we are going to study the book as we go through it. We're going to study it in time. We've talked about the seals. We've talked about the trumpets. And for those of you who are new, this class will continue going on. You don't have to begin at any particular point. I do have the recordings on the website, prophecyofjesus.com, but you can just pick it up and go forward if you want to. And the thing I'm trying to really drive home here is as we go forward, probably we're going to be 2 Sundays per chapter. We're going to deal with chapter 12, 13, 14, and 15 the next 8 weeks. That all of these are parenthetical. In other words, it's like when you're writing a sentence and you go, I was in the Bahamas. I used to work there. And then I have in parentheses, and I got all my Christian books at the bookstore in Nassau. Right. And then I keep on going with another thought. Okay. So in other words, it's a thought, a parenthetical is a thought that's lifted up out of the current context, but in some way related to it. So that's what it is. All these parentheticals, 12, 13, 14, 15, are related to everything that's going on in time at the bottom. But we have to realize that that without a framework, when you read these parentheticals, if you don't know where they occur in the timeline, you're going to get very confused. So my job is to show you what the timeline is and where things fit in. Oh, guess what? You see these images? I typed in a phrase into I think it was the Google or maybe it was the Copilot. Anyway, AI. I typed one phrase into AI and it made these. Show me a woman with the crown and the sun behind her, standing over, I forget exactly what I said. But anyway, came up with this. So it's not perfect, but I'm using it. And then I typed into, I said, make a picture that is Satan falling from heaven to earth. And it made this. It would take an artist a long time to do this. It made it that fast. So if you're wondering what AI is, this is just one aspect of it. This is AI for creating graphics and images. And it's baby steps. AI is not even started yet. This is what do they call the first pre-K, right? This is pre-K for AI. By 2030, it's predicted that AI will be smarter than all the people on Earth together. Wait a minute, how long we got here? 6 years, maybe? Some people say it's going to happen sooner. But it's the computer evolution, the speed of chips and everything else, it took a long time. And as I mentioned before, it used to be computer chips speed and capability doubled every 2.5 years, and knowledge was doubling about that time, according to Moore's law. But now we see that knowledge is doubling every second, every day. I should say every day. It's going to be every second. So, it's almost to the point where you can't measure it. It's going to become almost instantaneous. So what does knowledge mean? It means it's got your number. Everybody in this room is in a machine somewhere. Everything about you. They know your social security number, your name. They know how many kids you have. They know absolutely everything about you. If you're on Google all the time, they even know what you're going to buy next. That's why you go on there and you go, how did they know I was looking for a new stove? Because they know you. And that's nothing. Imagine when Antichrist gets a hold of it. What do you think he's going to do when he knows you? He's going to know if you are, what should we say, an instigator, a troublemaker, one of those nasty Christians. He's going to know you're one of those. And he'll send his people to, what do they say, neutralize you. You'll be neutralized. Okay, but let's go on with the book. Chapter 12. This is a parenthetical, and this is kind of a history, and also it's of the future. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun. We're in chapter 12, verse 1. Okay, so this symbol, like so many in Revelation, is not new. It's in the Bible already, and it's been there for thousands of years. So people that read this may not be aware of it unless you've read Genesis recently and remember it. But in Genesis, this exact symbolism is used to describe Israel. So when the Jews, the people with familiar with Judaism, read this in 95 AD, they would immediately understood who this is. So we see that she has, it's a woman, of course, and she has the sun around her, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So what are the 12 stars? They're the 12 tribes of Israel. So I think we all know who the 12 tribes are. If you don't, you can go back and read Revelation 7, where it mentions the 12 tribes. And we will see that as we go forward, that this symbol is utilized in a number of places. So first was used in Genesis 37. She was pregnant. Going back to my 5-year-old self. Okay. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. Okay. I don't expect you to know Greek, but I always like to look at the word because this is the same word that Jesus used in his Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. It's also Luke 21, Mark 13, parallel passages. But this is the only time Jesus ever talked about end times. I know it's hard to believe. 3.5 years and a few days before he went to the cross, he finally told them what was coming. For 3.5 years, he never told them anything about the church, never told them anything about what was coming in the end. They didn't even know he was going to the cross. He flat out told them. And when it happened, they went, gosh, how could this happen? You know, they were in shock. Most of them ran away. They're so shocked, except for one guy. One guy didn't run away. Guess who that was? John the Beloved. And guess who was given the revelation? John the Beloved. So the guy that didn't run away is the guy that got to see the second coming in the vision. So Odeon. Odio is, Odio, I don't know, it sounds like something from a 50s song. Anyway, no, Wizard of Oz. Odio. Anyway, yeah, but this is actual Greek word. And so this word is where we get our word odious. Not that people use that a lot. You know, it's more of a highfalutin English word. Oh, it was so odious when I was there, you know. So, you know, it sounds like an old English guy talking. But odious is, it was built off this original Greek word, and it means the suffering that a woman goes through when she's giving birth. So, so in the Greek, when it says that she was pregnant and crying out in birth pains, it's quite definite. It's not a matter of the translators, you know, being a little bit loose with the translation. That's literally, you know, we could translate it. She was pregnant, said pregnant again. All right, I'm sorry. I don't, you know, something's going on up here. I've asked for a new brain, but God so far has not given me one. So y'all keep praying for a new brain, will you? Okay, so anyway, so pregnant, and so she was crying out with the birth pains. In other words, labor pains. She was giving birth, and I think most of the women here, if you've had children anyway, know what that's about. We've had a number of those, and I was there trying to empathize with my wife. Remember, honey, how much of a help I was? She doesn't remember me being a big help. Anyway.
Why is she smiling?
You know, suck it up, baby. Suck it up. It's nothing. You can get through this. Okay. Oh, I'm going to go get a coffee and a donut. I'll be back. Anyway, so not to make light of it, but I don't think any man has any clue what it's like for a woman to give birth. God purposely did it that way. for some reason. Men were just not designed that way. Anyway, so these are the beginning of birth pangs. So who was the one that was the woman who was of Israel, the Israel woman who gave birth? And then in case we're further what should we say, a little dull on understanding this, he does flesh this out, the Holy Spirit. Another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. Before I've mentioned that diadems are royal crowns. Sometimes the word for a crown is Stephanos, and that is more like the Olympic Games, like a wreath. But this is actually a royal crown. It says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Another reference to this same type of thing is in Revelation 13:1, and another reference to this image is in 17:3. So it's just not one thing out of context. It's at least 3 times in the scripture, plus its original image that we see back in the Old Testament. At any rate, I think most people, when they see a red dragon or a dragon in scripture, realize the dragon is Satan, Dracon, and or Draco. We've got a neighbor whose dog is named Draco. Well, that's just a form of dragon. Cute little dog, wouldn't hurt a flea, but his name is Dragon. Okay. But at any rate, so here we have 7 heads. So we have to understand what do the heads mean. The heads are representative of empires that affected the nation of Israel. So I could say world empires. They're usually called world empires. But the thing is that these heads represent, from the book of Daniel, especially, you see the references clearly named. They represent all the kingdoms or empires of the, we should say, Mid-East. I mean, they don't involve China. If you look up empires of the world, you're going to see all kinds of empires all around the world. But God is not interested in those directly. In other words, the only thing for prophecy that counts is Israel. All prophecy is about Israel and only about Israel. The prophecy is only about the church as a peripheral issue. In other words, there's no prophecy directly in the Old Testament about the church. There's some more obtuse, like Jeremiah says, I'm going to put a new heart in them, replace the stony heart. But the word church doesn't appear in the Old Testament. Nobody in the Old Covenant, Old Testament knew anything about the church. It was a mystery. And that's why the mystery was given to Paul, so we could be educated what the church is, what Jesus meant, what his death, burial, and resurrection meant, and what his coming means for us. So in the empires, it's not a matter of dry history. I know the wife doesn't care much for history, but it's because she had a bad history teacher. Anybody have one of those? And a bad math teacher, so you hate math. Teachers can make a difference. But at any rate, so we have the Egyptian Empire. Can anybody tell me what happened during the Egyptian world empire? Well, that's when Moses went up to Pharaoh. If you need a refresher, go watch the 10 Commandments. I think they have a new one. I kind of don't like the new ones because they always change stuff and it's always for the worst. Whatever they make today, a remake today is not going to be as faithful as the older ones, because the people that write these things are unbelieving heathen people in general, unless it's purely a Christian movie, of course. Okay, so the Egyptian Empire was the first one. World empire, meaning really just around the Mediterranean, northern Africa, all the way through Spain and around the Mediterranean. That whole area of these empires is involved in this topic. So then we see the Assyrian Empire. Israel went into the land, and eventually Solomon's sons took over North and South Kingdom, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And as the northern kingdom went more and more into idolatry, God brought an enemy, as he said he would, to take them away. And that enemy was the Assyrian Empire. So they had some fierce kings. Sargon II came, and then Tiglath-Pileser came and took the northern empire away, took them captive. And what they did, they were the inventors of terrorism, by the way. So if we hear the word terrorism today, Assyrians were the original terrorists. They invented terror. But when they took the Israelites of the northern kingdom away into captivity, they took their own people and planted them in Israel, the northern kingdom, which later became known as Samaria. And that's why the Jews, in time of Jesus, when he went to the well, the Samaritan woman, why she said, "You Jews don't talk to us or have anything to do with us," because the Southern Kingdom Jews, which also, was known as Judah, they were very faithful in general to the law of Moses. But in the Northern Kingdom, because they planted in all these pagans, these heathen, they became enmeshed with the people there, and they brought in their pagan idols. And so the Jews despised the Samaritans because they were half Jews. They weren't real Jews. They were half Assyrians and half Jews, but the Assyrian idols took over. So because of that, they were taken away. And then we see Babylonian. I think you probably remember the story, the old Bible story of course, the writing on the wall. Remember the handwriting on the wall, and it said, "Your kingdom is taken away from you." So the Babylonians, they before that happened, before they were taken over, they ruled the known Mediterranean world, and they went in and destroyed the first temple, 606, and in 586 they went back and they destroyed the temple and took Daniel and his pals back to Babylon. And so that was the first destruction of the first temple, which was the glorious temple. And then after that happened, they were taken over, as I mentioned, when the handwriting was on the wall. The Medo-Persians were very clever. Babylon was an impenetrable city. Nobody could take it. It was the greatest city maybe that the world's ever seen in that time. And so, but there was an Achilles heel. The Medo-Persians discovered that they had to have water, and so the water was going under the wall. The wall, nobody could get over or through the wall. These walls were wide enough for 2 chariots to race around the entire city. Nobody could take that city. But what the Medo-Persians did is they realized if we just put a dam upstream and we just slowly lower the water over time, then it's going to get low enough we can sneak in under the wall. And that's what they did, and they took over the city. So the Medo-Persians, the Persians, and later the Medes, so we just call it the Medes and Persians or Medo-Persian Empire. King Cyrus, and then we have Darius, allowed the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple. That was Zerubbabel's temple, the second temple, and to build the walls of the city. So they were very influential in affecting Israel. And then the Greek Empire. We have Alexander, who was probably the greatest military genius of the time. Probably maybe for all time, but at any rate, he swept across the known world and conquered it, and he brought his Hellenistic culture. Ellen is the name of Greece in the actual old language. Ellen, H is a soft, so Helen, we say Helen or Hellenistic. But so Hellenized the Jewish culture, and at the time of Christ, many of the Jews were influenced by it. So you had the Pharisees who were very strict and would not acknowledge or do anything Hellenistic. They would not acknowledge any of the Greek ways, the pagan ways. But you had Sadducees and other sects who were buddy-buddy with the Greeks because that's where the bread and butter was. So anyway, it explains why you had Pharisees and Sadducees. And so, but the whole story is that the Greek Empire, after Alexander was split into his 4 generals, and his 4th general Seleucus took over the Syrian part and ruled Israel. And in 166, he went into the temple. That's the second temple, and he slew a pig and defiled it. He committed what all Jews understood was the abomination of desolation. He slew a pig on the altar. So all that's to say, when you see Hanukkah, that's how Hanukkah came about. The Maccabee brothers, a bunch of brothers from a particular tribe, decided they weren't going to put up with it. And so they fought the Greeks and kicked them out for a short amount of time. And there was a miracle, according to them, where the light of the menorah was kept burning for 7, 8 days. I think it was 8 days. And so that's how you get Hanukkah. The Jews started celebrating Hanukkah, and you find in the Gospel Jesus celebrated Hanukkah, even though it was not one of the Mosaic holidays, not one of the big seven. So he had another one, so there became 8 Hanukkah. But our festival of lights, it says in some Bibles. So when the Greeks took over, they started, influencing the Jews against Judaism, you would say. It's called syncretism. Syncretism is where you have a bunch of pagan beliefs and you have the Orthodox real beliefs and you bring them together. Perfect example of that is I saw a picture of a church in Central South America. I think it was Central America. It was a Catholic church where they had Mary and Joseph and everything, and then they had all kinds of demonic entities in there. Okay, so the people worshipped these demon figures and Joseph and Mary. That's a perfect example. Maybe you've seen pictures of it, of syncretism. As far as I know, that doesn't happen in the United States, but it did down there. So I guess the priests decided if you can't beat them, join them. So let's bring in their stuff too. Everybody will be happy. We're many ways to heaven. But I digress. So anyway, that's what happened to the Greek Empire. That was everywhere. So then finally, the Romans in 69 BC, Pompey, the Roman general, went and conquered Israel and went up into the temple, and he was going to basically take it over, and he did. He killed the priests, and he allowed and his fellow Roman emperors, he wasn't an emperor, he was a general, but the emperors allowed, the Jews to rule themselves to an extent under Pontius Pilate or some other procurator who would be a minister administering their territory. And that was the territory of Palestine. There never has been a Palestinian state. So if anybody wants to confuse you, the Romans 2,000 years ago had a territory which included a lot of areas, Syria all the way over. And that was called the territory of Palestine, which was a Roman administrate. So don't confuse that with a Palestinian state. That was a Roman state, not a Palestinian state. There never has been a history of Palestinian state. So when these folks out there say we want our state back, they're ignorant of history. They've never had a state. You can Google it. Has there ever been in history a Palestinian state? As I did, and AI came back and said no. So I'm going to believe AI about that. It's usually pretty good about history and facts in most cases. So anyway, so the Romans took over, and guess what? We then begin our Gospels, and what do we find in Palestine? We find the 6th kingdom. Remember the 7 heads? This first head is Egypt, second head is Syria, third head Babylon, fourth head Media Persian, fifth head Greek, and 6th head of the 7-headed beast is the Roman Empire. There's coming another one which has never existed in time. You'll find if you look it up, some sites will say that there was an Arabian Empire. Keeping in mind that at the time of the Arabian or Islamic Empire, there was no Israel. So God doesn't recognize that. That's only things that affect directly Israel, the actual state of Israel, the nation of Israel. So we're gonna skip almost 2,000 years before we come to the next empire. So the Romans came on the 9th of Av, AD 70. Titus and his Roman legions destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, and as Christ predicted in Matthew 24, the soldiers, because they were greedy, it was all covered in gold, and the fire had burned the temple, and all the gold ran down between the cracks. They took all the stones apart, huge stones, which some are there today, and scraped the gold off with their swords and made off with it. Although Titus told them not to do that. They were given an order, don't do that. They did it anyway because there was a lot of money there. So isn't that the way it is? So the soldiers disobeyed Titus and their general, and they made off with the gold. And that's the only reason that Christ's prophecy was fulfilled in the sense of man's thinking. In other words, Jesus knew it was going to happen, but he didn't tell us why it was going to happen. It was going to happen because they wanted the gold that ran down the cracks. And that's what happened. Anyway, but in the future, the 7th head. So when we see 7 heads of this beast, understand that it's not an unknowable thing. It's a clearly knowable thing. If you understand the history of Israel and you understand the nations and kingdoms that have empires that have affected it. So what we have coming in the future is known as the 7th empire, the 7th head, which will be coming in the future. Let me see if I can get back to something here. Ah, there it is. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is share something that is sort of speculation, but not really. In other words, and a lot of people don't understand this, that the seventh head is going to have 10 horns. The seventh head will be the revived Roman Empire, not necessarily that it's going to be the nations exactly where the Roman Empire was, but Europe, it's a better way to say it is that the European power, which used to be known as Rome, the European power is going to be the headquarters and is going to set up 10 world zones. All those six nations, not nations, empires that I mentioned, none of those was worldwide. In their, European, Mediterranean centered worldview, all they cared about was what was around them. They didn't know about China. They didn't even know there was an America. Prophets intimated it, but they didn't know. As I've taught before, North America, South America was unknown to them. If you sailed too far out into the Atlantic, you would run into dragons and fall off the earth. And so that was it. So if you read a map and you're looking at the map and you go, I'm going to take a trip, and out on the corner, the map maker, the cartographer had written, beyond here, fall off earth, there be dragons. Then you show it to your crew that all go, hey, listen, Columbus, I've been thinking about this again. You find some other guys for this trip, which makes you wonder how, because that's how they're thinking in the time of Columbus, what gutsy people he got to go with them, although they failed at the end. They all were afraid. I digress. But at any rate, the whole thing is the world is going to be divided into 10 zones. Is it going to be these 10 zones since it's a worldwide empire of Antichrist? Maybe, maybe not, but it gives us a good departure point to think about it. And by the way, the first zone already exists today economically. So you see the purple up there in the top left. We have Canada, we have the United States, and we have Mexico. Okay. Until recently, there was a trade agreement which was in effect called NAFTA, North America Trade Alliance. Yeah. Or association. So basically, that is the beginning of what will become a geopolitical and economic alliance. The whole world at the time of Antichrist is going to be divided into 10 spheres because it's a worldwide empire. People have tried to say it's the nations of Europe, but it's not, because it has to be worldwide. And also we can see it already forming. So it looks like maybe South America will be one zone. North Africa will be split in two, North and South. And of course, we have Europe, and then we have Russia. It looks like it's its own entity because it's a lot of territory. But at any rate, all that is to say that in some configuration, this is what's going to happen. The world will be divided into 10 portions, 10 sections, 10 zones, since it's beyond countries. Each zone most of them will be comprised of multiple countries that exist today. So that's what the seventh head is. The seventh head is going to be often called the revived Roman Empire worldwide, not just Mediterranean. And we're going to continue on next time, and we're going to, with this being laid down, we're going to discuss a very important concept. We're going to discuss next time Lucifer, who became Satan, Michael, and Gabriel, who is already mentioned, although you might not realize it. The word Gabriel doesn't appear. But when you talk about the woman giving birth, who was the key factor? Who was the key archangel in the factor or the scenario of Mary giving birth? The announcement, Gabriel. So in this chapter 12, we have Gabriel intimated between the lines. We have Satan outright mentioned, and we have Michael outright mentioned. Anyway, next time also, I'm going to give you a clear delineation and understanding of the third heaven, second heaven, first heaven, hell, which is comprised of torments, the abyss, Abraham's bosom, Gehenna, and the abyss. These are all biblical terms, and I find that most people don't know that there are multiple heavens mentioned in the Bible and that there are multiple hells. There is no such thing as H-E-L-L. There is no place that's just hell. That doesn't exist. The Bible doesn't talk about it that way. The Bible talks about multiple places within the underworld, or Hades, which is often translated hell. So is anybody going to hell? Not actually, although it's translated that way. People are going to particular places in the underworld, if you will. And we're going to talk about those. Jesus is the one that gave us the greatest insight into this. Oh, by the way, Jesus was the greatest preacher in the Bible on hell. Nobody talked as much about hell. I use that generically as he. In the Old Testament, is very little about it, really. The New Testament, it is mentioned a number of times, but he's the first, as the last prophet and the Messiah also. He mentioned and gave us the greatest understanding of the underworld, hell. Also, we are going to get a lot more information about heavens. So when the Bible mentions heavens, you got to figure out which heaven is it talking about. There isn't just one heaven from the Bible standpoint. The English Bible, unfortunately, is not good at differentiating. The Greek is very specific. English is kind of it's like the word love. I'm going to end, but the word love, there's 4 different words in Greek for love, and each of them is very specific. There's brotherly love, Philadelphia. There's eros, which is sexual love. There's stelios, love for a thing. And there's of course, agape or agape, which is love of God. So the Bible that we have, unfortunately, English is kind of a poor language that way. It just says love, so you can't differentiate. But in the Greek, they knew when they said a particular word that it meant this or it meant that. It wasn't a generic love word like we have. Anyway, the Bible's good. I'm glad it's in English, but it's important sometimes to look at the Greek. And I notice the pastor oftentimes will bring out something in the Greek because it's important to know a little bit about it. You don't have to study it. But given that and given where we're going next week, don't miss out because it's going to be we're going to have one hell of a time. No, that's not right. We're going to have a heaven and a hell of a time. We're going to talk about all the spheres of this diagram.